In today's episode, I'm talking to Paulo Rosado, CEO of OutSystems, and we're going to talk about the challenges and opportunities that AI brings into the software development industry. Paulo, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure, Andres.
We were warming up in the conversation before, super interesting topics. I wanted to open with the question of what is, in your view, the new disrupt factor in the software industry?
Well, definitely, Gen AI is a big disrupting factor. What we've seen also is that Gen AI, in the case, for instance, of OutSystems, has created the opportunity for everyone to understand that the craft of software development is actually something that can be automated. And so a lot of IT departments, a lot of CTOs, a lot of CIOs which were very keen on using pure code, manual coding as their fundamental philosophy, have now looked into this whole craft as we need to kind of re-engage the way we think about the fact that this particular function can be automated. And so Gen AI, it's incredible because it brought a change and an openness of mindsets towards platforms like OutSystems.
Now, it's interesting to see the impact that this technology will have in both. You said it before, the professional developers and even the business leaders that look at software development now and in a different way. We talked before about the impact in junior developers versus senior developers. I'd love to bring this question back because I found it super interesting. How does this technology impacting the developer sort of continuum?
Yeah. So what a lot of this first generation of Gen AI solutions, like the Copilot of Microsoft, and this notion of assistance, which basically help a developer kind of generate code and avoid typing code. One of the things we've seen is that it improves productivity, it improves the generation of that code substantially. The issue is that experienced developers tend to take that a little bit longer because when the code is generated, they actually recognize the patterns. And so they understand what is generated. What's happening is something that we've seen in the past with in other situations also, is that for more junior developers, as the amount of complexity and the sophistication of the generated solutions increase, the code starts becoming more and more opaque. So they don't really understand it. They cannot recognize the patterns. And so after a while, you need to stop generating this much. And so that's kind of almost like a limitation.
And go back to what it has been generated.
And so when we think about the potential for Gen AI to really generate full applications or a very large amount of applications, we have to realize that the larger the amount of software that's generated, the more reverse engineering needs to be done if we want a human to actually understand it. And so what we'll see is that there will be tools to generate code, and there will be tools to explain the code that was generated to a point where the code will become something that is no longer part of the conversation, which will become buried inside these interfaces. And those things, that type of evolution is what we believe that's going to happen in the future.
Even the developer itself, the role itself of the developer has to change. Probably skill set has to change, right?
Yeah, it's like any... it's interesting sometimes when we get these disruptions, it's useful to see to go back to first principles and try to see what happened in other industries. We've always seen software development the way it was done in the past 20 years, and even before that, as fundamentally a very manual task, probably one of the last manual jobs in the world. It's the largest guild of artisans, is probably the number of software developers that exist in the world. It's a very manual craft, the tools. There's always a myriad of hammers and screwdrivers and that appear. And our vision when we started OutSystems 21 years ago has not changed. We saw a tremendously inefficient process that created a lot of grief for businesses who wanted to have systems built very quickly, wanted to have the opportunity to make mistakes and experimentations and change their minds and change the software. And all that process was very, very cumbersome because it was manual. And so automation really was the way to look into this. So looking back to the skill sets, what we've seen is that, yes, for instance, these platforms will change the way we do development. Is that craft will move increasingly more towards a controlling, much more high level. Same way today you see highly skilled technicians operating factories with bots and things like that. That's what's going to happen to this industry. And we don't know exactly how this is going to change, but we can see already a projection looking into our own developer community, where we've seen increasingly from the past 15 years an evolution of the skill sets and the ones that really work. When you have automation available to you, when you don't have to deal with toil, when scalability is assured, when you have security is assured, when tracing and observability is already built in, and you concentrate purely on the business, on understanding the business, on automating it, on creating great interfaces, suddenly your skill set changes to be a much more empathic one, much more
human.
Exactly. Actually, it's that much more, much less risk averse, and so we see a lot of attributes that make the OutSystems community successful as being almost like a canary bird. Of what's going to happen with the skill set of the Gen AI revolution.
I love this example and the notion of the artisan of the future in a way, right? So how will an artisan look like in the future? This notion of Copilot, also we've seen it starting to change the roles and the skills that needed on some people, some professions. Your point on business, we see it in our M365 Copilot, etc. How they change the interaction even in business processes themselves. I wonder how would then companies drive innovation with that new skill set? Probably we'll see more human type of innovation, more interfaces, better interfaces. The technology will get closer. I don't know what's your view, what's your far-sighted view on this?
Well, in terms of interfaces, today we use a lot of we use fundamentally two types of interfaces when we build applications. We use desktop interfaces, where the big difference is the way we input data. There's a keyboard typically, and then we use mobile form factors like the smartphone, and really the smartphone. The iPad is a little bit on the fringes here. And one of the things that it's clear on the mobile is that inputting data is a tremendously friction-full user experience. And that's why if you see the best interfaces, you take pictures to the credit cards. And what will, I believe that a lot of these interfaces, especially on input levels, will be impacted by Gen AI, where you basically talk to the interface and the form gets filled. And then the forms disappear, and so you can talk to some of these things, or you can basically just copy stuff or take a picture, and suddenly that thing fills up a form completely. So there's a lot of transformation of text, which is one of the top use cases now for this first generation of Gen AI systems that will help dramatically the interfaces. But we can see that if Gen AI really works well, and it does work well with text to speech and speech to text, that a lot of a very large amount of interfaces are going to be voice interfaces.
That's right.
And so the devices will lose a lot of the visual aspect that they have. We actually have a very strong belief in what is going to be the type of user interface of the future. Mm-hmm. And so in that regard, we're preparing a little bit for that. But it's dicey. It's sometimes things. I still remember a very, very big company, a very well-known CTO of a multi-billion dollar company announced that 5 years ago that the interface of the future was going to be voice. And what we see is that voice is very inconvenient in a lot of use cases. Uh-huh. We have tons of use cases where voice is not the best interface.
Right.
As well as conversation, as well as typing an intent is not the best thing for a lot of things. And so what we'll see is that an evolution of interfaces based on hybrid, on visual confirmation of things, a little bit of voice, a little bit of text.
And visual perception, other AI that's been there forever, perhaps.
Exactly.
Coming together.
And so it will really depend on, it's going to be an area of disruption, user interfaces, but it's pretty exciting. I think what's going to happen.
Fantastic. I think you're right. Is the evolution of the interaction with technology just itself poses a big challenge for us. And Paulo, speaking about challenges, before we talked about the role of the developer and code and software being sort of an obscure object, and we talked about that very concept, and all the challenges that the regulation brings with it, right? So at Microsoft, we are actually very, very close to what's happening in the European Union, for example, the AI Act and things like that. Try to be closer to what needs to be regulated and make sure that technology does fulfill that regulation. How do you see the landscape with these new changes in obscure objects and software being not always in control? We talked about this before. I'd love to see your views here.
Yeah, I think what we see is that, as always, and for instance, for us, it's relatively easy to understand this. One of the issues with very simple solutions where you use Gen AI agents to generate code is that whenever you want to make a change, so you change slightly the intent, you might get, one of the things that you might get is a completely different regeneration of large portions of that code. That has a lot of issues. For instance, our platform is used in high compliant environments where there's a chain of validations that are automatically done by the customers, for instance, in government, in finance. We have a lot of situations like that where they have validated large swaths of software that we generate, and they don't want suddenly with a small change that the whole thing changes completely.
Just need to
maybe for the better, but,
yes, probably.
But in this particular case, stability is a crucial element. And so it's difficult we can do that when we have a deterministic process of compilation or generation of code. But when the full process is fully generated by an AI, you don't really understand what's going to happen in the end. And so what we see, for instance, when we already see the innings, people discovering things that we discovered 15 to 20 years ago, which is that you have to have kind of a semantic layer in the middle where you generate with Gen AI, and then from that point on, you have a huge amount of validations and a more deterministic process, still sometimes empowered by agents, but it needs to be a deterministic power where you can assure that from that point on, there is a transformation that's repeatable, and that doesn't change by just teaching the model or teaching the neural network.
The concept of governance and transparency, if you will.
Yeah, and validations, auditing. I mean, you can do auditing, of course, with bots. Again, there is a bot to generate, the bot to validate, the bot to test. You can do that, but it's always going to be statistically. You have to, there will be a point where you're not sure if the thing that you've tested in the past is going to be tested. Is going to be tested again.
And to a certain extent, the requirements of the regulations in different countries will have to adapt to a world like that.
Yeah,
The requirements.
and that's absolutely true. As the world becomes faster, there is a sense that if we want to be faster, we have to assume that we're going to make more frequent mistakes, which conversely, we should correct them faster. And
Right.
so if there is a change in society in general, where you are much more acceptance of risk and change, then I believe some of these problems will be diminished. But then if we go back to, for instance, self-driving cars, and the way the legislation and the fact that whenever there is one accident with a self-driving car, it basically almost damages the reputation of the whole, unfairly, I would say, but it damages the reputation. And I cannot see a lot of the thousands of customers that we have not having issues like that in particular areas of their business. And so we need to have a lot of that acceleration that AI gave us, but we also we need to have mechanisms where there is deterministic control somewhere where we can actually, we can understand how the thing is being audited and not in an opaque neural network that we cannot really
control
understand.
Yes. We talked about this notion of the guardrails on AI in particular. How do we control even the whole model's behavior, the AI itself, let alone the layers in between. I think it's a huge challenge for the industry, for our industry, moving forward. Just to change a little bit, they talk a little bit more about OutSystems, which I found a fascinating case in Portugal. You've been innovating for the last 20-something years.
Yeah, 22.
22 years. How do you keep pace with that rate of innovation?
It's interesting. I think I've discovered almost by reverse engineering, thinking about this in the past years, that we've, as we grew towards like hundreds of millions of dollars of revenues and a very large size, that we've always kind of kept a startup DNA. And whenever and we had several phases in our growth, and when that startup DNA has been challenged, the company has almost rejected it. And so, for instance, we're going now through a process of accelerating the rate of change, because we're growing faster now. And so accelerating the rate of change, creating more autonomy, changing a culture to one thing we call a federation of teams culture.
Okay.
Where we try to make every leader, a owner, a founder, working in tandem, in alignment and cooperation with others. So a kind of a federation of startups, really.
So the old hierarchy and structure is no longer in use.
It's actually very, very useful to have hierarchies. I mean, but they are not the most important thing. They are basically just servants of the teams that are really the ones who do the job. And if you look into the architectures of the modern digital platforms, they're very similar to this. It's microservices, it's small parts that interact, loosely coupled interaction between them so that they have a final system, final production system with some failure which never takes the system down, but sometimes there is a transient failure in one of the systems that gets replaced. And that's exactly what happens if we want agility at the level of people. And so that startup DNA, we basically implement it now at a very large scale so that we can continue growing at the speed we're growing.
And you've shown that it's possible.
Yeah,
which is great.
And that's possible. It's actually an interesting exercise.
Now, are Portugal companies ready to such organization type to keep pace with innovation? In other words, what do you think?
Well, OutSystems is really a company that's there's a melting pot of cultures. We have a high density of Portuguese. We have a high density of Americans, and then we have a lot of other cultures, 30, 40 people in multiple geographies. One of the things we had to do is to actually take the two largest influences, which is really the Portuguese culture and the American culture, and go back to basics in what means to have a fantastic environment where everyone can thrive and everyone feels motivated. And we took from the United States the concern with time and the urgency, which is an amazing attribute that exists in that country.
True.
And we took from Portugal the adaptability and the loyalty and the interest and motivation of doing the right thing, which we love. And then when you look into these two characteristics and you go and try to apply them in everyone in the country, it's actually in every other country. It's actually interesting because these are two characteristics that everyone admires. And so in a way, we were able to kind of create
combine the best of
a
two.
combined culture without really killing what makes each culture
Exactly.
Interesting. Because we always need to have heterogeneous inputs so that we don't get in inbreed type of conversations.
That's the challenge and the beauty of diversity, right?
Exactly.
You need to get the right combination.
So the smallest amount of rules, smallest amount of tenets that really make the OutSystems culture, and the rest is autonomous, and we let people make their decisions in their cultures, in their locales, as much as possible, so that we can leverage the way they think, their brain power, and their drive.
This leads me to the next thinking process, which is we talked about the artisan of the future and the skills of the future. The type of skills that we're trying to embed in the country by making investments in technical skilling sometimes. What do you think is going to be the skill that the employee, the artisan of the future maybe needs in 10 years from now or something like that?
If you look, for instance, into the collection of attributes, about 12 years ago, we issued a culture book that it was called the Small Book of the Few Big Rules. It had 7 rules.
Okay.
The first one was ask why and whatever. And we felt that as we change, we are in a situation where we had to actually change some of the attributes that we found core. And we put in the first thing we say in that new book is that this book will change probably in the next year. And so we assume that change is almost like is a constant, really. It's the only constant. So I would say that, for instance, at the point that we are now, where we need to have a lot of autonomy, but all the pieces need to move into more or less the same direction. Alignment is probably the biggest thing. Alignment comes back with a capacity for communication, for explaining simple things, for not complicating, for being able to think well, but then explain well also, a lot of empathy. And so I would tell you those are probably 50% of the things we value the most now in the company. Besides technical skills and whatever, and competence, is really around being able to work with others and being able to explain so that we don't have endless discussions around the topic. We can move and make decisions very quickly. Yeah, exactly.
I think that notion goes even outside the company, the notion of partnerships. And we've seen some of the partnerships that technology companies, even traditionally competitors, would make. I think that sort of, translates into new business opportunities.
Yeah, it does. It's more difficult to control when your ecosystem is external because, you cannot enforce really your culture of speed and autonomy, right, and alignment and innovation into others. But there is a lot that you can do. And today, for instance, we have 400 really active partners around the world. And those partners are really extensions of the company. And more, we see them as really no difference as collaborators.
Extended force.
Same thing as our workforce. And we see ourselves, for instance, as enablers to help, like when you are a senior, you help a junior grow in their career, which is, again, one of the 6 qualities we ask for leaders. We also are asking everyone in the company to help grow the partners into being the most successful they can be, because we really are the experts in our own technology. We always take the first releases of the product. We try and see what works, what are the playbooks and whatever.
Built-in.
Exactly. We do a lot of that experimentation. Sometimes when a project is really new or it's testing the fringes of the product, we take it as one of our professional services take it. And so there's probably like 10,000 projects in OutSystems in the world at the same time. We take about 15 to 30, so it's very small.
Right.
But they are chosen as things that where we want to experiment. So we get a lot of new knowledge that we need to pass forward to the community. I think a lot of that skill set is that transference of knowledge, very fast transference of knowledge, because the knowledge is changing at such a fast rate.
And it has its own life and cycles itself.
Yeah. You want teams, you want practitioners that are very good at constantly aligning so that they keep, whenever they have a focus, they can explain what their focus is to the other team or to the other person that's also doing their thing, so that their focus are aligned and coherent, so that they can move in the same direction. Because everything changes so fast, it's very easy to derail, to have people derail. And so that skill set is crucial.
Fantastic. So, Paulo, we have a lot of, or a vibrant ecosystem of startups here in Portugal. Taking advantage of your experience, what would be your biggest learning, if you want to share it to the community, the people that's going to see us, biggest learning in and take it to this world of today?
It's different. It's interesting because as you get to sizes of $1 billion revenue and stuff like that, you look back and said, I could have reached this point and cut about 7 years if I've done things in a particular way.
Right.
So I would say, for instance, for Portuguese is definitely the fact that the Portuguese as a market is very small. So you can never really create a company between 40 to 100 million without going abroad almost immediately. And that's a very costly thing. So I would say that the first thing is that the first market that you go, the first country that you go, needs to have a sufficiently large market to sustain, to be able for you to grow a company without dispersing into a vector of having to tackle several countries. By the way, we didn't do this. We did it the hard way. And
that's how we learned it.
Yeah. We went to Holland, then we went to Spain, and then we went to Brazil. And when we entered the United States, we were already in 18 countries.
Right. Sometimes proximity. Yes, true.
And still very small. We were 440 million at the time.
Right.
And the other thing I think is something I've learned by looking back, but I've learned also with a lot of colleagues from the United States, CEOs that have done this multiple times, is that whenever you're small, you actually have to enforce a lot of the characteristics of scale into your startups. And so the moment you discover what is your product market fit, what is your sub-segment, what are the collection of narrow use cases that you really have a sucking noise, you have demand, you need to lock on that and put all the mechanisms of scale and do not diverge from that path. So that as you start growing and creating, repeating and removing friction and oiling the machinery starts producing just by putting a little bit more fuel, it grows exponentially.
Fantastic.
And I see a lot of companies, not only in Portugal but in Europe, because of a tendency to go slower and to not have that perception of extremely large scale, that when they're small, they do a lot of shortcuts, they do a lot of things that later on they have to clean up. Because they have not built the scaling machine when they were small.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Fantastic. Paulo, I'm asking all my guests one question. So what's in a personal level, in the world of copilots and AI, what tasks would you delegate in your daily work or life? How's Paulo plus AI?
Oh, actually, I do. I think a lot of the stuff that I do is extremely exceptionally. So I have a lot of people that help me it's difficult for me at my level to see where I could delegate, because most of the stuff that I do is exceptional. Exceptional in the sense that it's not great. It's just that it's an exception.
It's not standard.
It's not standard. And I've tried, for instance, when I plan like a 3-day outing, I'm very peculiar in the type of things I've done. And I've tried ChatGPT, for instance, in multiple generations to help me plan those 3 days. And it's always blah. There's no invention, there's no innovation there, and that's of course a specific case. I've tried also for instance summarization of the stuff that I write. Then it loses the humor. Then the humor that it takes is from someone else, and so you lose your identity there. And so I've been trying myself to get some of these things. And what I've seen is that it's really useful for a lot of automation, removing toil in the company. That's what I like, work that no one wants to do. That's like 90% of the way I see at this point now these things work. But until they start having a personality, these AIs.
Your personality.
Not my personality. Actually, I like a lot of people that deal with me. I really love feisty personalities that challenge me and make fun of me and whatever. And I can imagine eventually an AI doing that. But so far, they're very blah and very boring.
I guess we're all going through that journey, trying to find that value ourselves. I'm also experimenting with some scenarios that are actually been useful for me here and there. I need to find those. Paulo, I think it's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you very much for being with us today. And it's been a great pleasure.
No, it's a pleasure, Andres. And this is a great initiative. So thank you very much for inviting me.